After 10 years of marriage, Paul still did not remember my birthday, but I no longer cared. Someone else had already sent me flowers. The love words on the card were even more passionate than that huge bouquet of champagne roses. Paul stared at it with a frown for a long time. I was very nervous, afraid he would recognize whose handwriting it was. But he merely tossed the flowers back to me with an expression of understanding and contempt. If you wanted to remind me that today is your birthday, you could have just said it. There's no need to pull these tricks. Aren't you tired of it? Chapter 1. I froze, unsure whether I should feel sorrow or relief. I could not blame him for thinking that way, back when I still wanted to work hard for this relationship. On Valentine's Day, when he showed no concern at all, I had anonymously sent flowers to myself, pretending someone was pursuing me. So this time, he also thought it was another self-directed performance by me. As usual, he mocked me a few times and even seemed a little pleased with himself. He was too arrogant. If he had paid even the slightest attention to the reports about his proudest student, Luis, he would have discovered that the flowers covering the entire stage at Luis's final concert were also champagne roses. Chapter 2. When I married Paul, everyone said I had married well. They said that in my youngest years, I had exchanged my beauty for a lifetime of security. I was also blinded by that halo, thinking I had stepped into a fairy tale, but I never expected that. To Paul, marriage was merely the completion of a conventional task. Afterward, he plunged into his own world, leaving me alone to suffer through the rough reality. On a moving day that had been scheduled long ago, he deliberately chose to go on a business trip that week, leaving the entire mess to me. Even the movers were shocked. Are you the only one here? Where's your husband? I smiled bitterly, unable to answer. My husband was an artist who did not concern himself with worldly matters. Whenever he encountered any troublesome issue, he would find an excuse to hide away and enjoy peace, then return gracefully once everything had been resolved. He did not care how I solved it, whether I exhausted myself, or whether my hands were injured by falling objects. In any case, he was completely certain that when the time came, I would definitely handle everything. Yes, the invitations for the housewarming party at the new place had already been sent out. The audience waiting to witness my happiness was already at the door, so I had no choice but to work hard to cover things up, placing streamers and balloons over every hollow space, lively and warmly responding to all the envy and blessings everyone had given my marriage back then. And Luis was the first person to discover the cracks in my facade. Chapter 3. That day, Paul lost his temper at home, blaming me for losing the letters from his ex-girlfriend during the move. Of all the things you could have lost, why did it have to be that box of letters? Do you know that my best inspirations were all written on them? I truly felt wronged. There had been more than 100 boxes, big and small, and I was alone. I also had to keep an eye on the workers moving his precious piano. How was I supposed to know which one had gone missing? But Paul was certain that I had done it on purpose. In retaliation, he rummaged through boxes and cabinets, deliberately pulling out drawers one by one and dumping them out, letting everything spill all over the floor. The house I had spent 3 days arranging by myself became a chaotic battlefield again. At that moment, a deep disgust surged from the bottom of my heart. But just then, the doorbell rang. A student had come for class. Paul glanced at me, left behind the words "Go open the door," then walked gracefully into the piano room, as if he knew I would clean everything up as quickly as possible, then open the door and force out the gentle, virtuous smile of a teacher's wife in front of his student. Yes, he guessed right. Dignity was something I would cling to until the grave, even if I had to endure real pain. That afternoon, amid the intermittent sound of piano music, I suppressed wave after wave of grievance in my chest and searched every corner for Paul's letters. I also called the moving company. The moment I opened my mouth, I could not control the sob in my voice, so I had to hang up first and take deep breaths to calm myself down. When I turned around, I met Luis's stunned face. There was still surprise and embarrassment in his eyes that he had not had time to hide. I squeezed out a smile and greeted him hoarsely. "Class is over?" "No." The teacher asked me to get him a glass of water. Luis stared fixedly at my already reddened eyes. But in the end, he maintained proper boundaries and did not ask more. Only before returning to the piano room, he carefully handed me a bandage. "Madam, your arm seems to be scratched." I instinctively lowered my head and saw a rather large wound on my arm. It was probably from the glass that had shattered earlier. The blood had already dried a little. Paul had not seen it. Even I had not noticed it myself. But Luis had. Chapter 4. Among Paul's students, Luis was not particularly conspicuous. As a professor at a top music academy, Paul's inner circle disciples were either rich or powerful. For someone like Luis, whose connections were not strong enough, simply being able to enter the door was already good. There were only 3 chairs in the piano room at home, and the students who came often had all become Paul's disciples when they were very young. Luis did not even have a seat here. He could only stand awkwardly to the side, as if being punished. Any normal person, after being treated so coldly a couple of times, would have understood the hint and left. Paul had driven away many people this way, but Luis still came every time. And he was very sensible. Even if he arrived early, he would not take anyone else's seat. He just stood there, standing until even I could no longer bear to watch. And I brought him a stool from another room. I originally thought that the bandage was merely the child's gratitude for my earlier kindness. I did not expect him to be attentive down to the smallest details. Another time, when Luis came for class, Paul was not home, so I let him practice on Paul's piano. Paul's piano was even more expensive than the one in their school auditorium. Even when his inner circle disciples came for lessons, they might not get to play it for more than a few minutes. Luis happily practiced for a long time. In the end, he even specially played one of Paul's compositions for me. Lily, the teacher, improvised it for us in class last time. I remembered it immediately. Every note seemed filled with love, as expected. It sounds even better when played on the teacher's own piano. The teacher must love you very much, madam, to have written such a wonderful piece for you. This young man was comforting me in his own way. But the sad thing was, I was not Lily. Lily was Paul's ex-girlfriend, the owner of the letters he had desperately wanted to find that day. How is that possible? Luis blurted out. He was still too young. He could not yet understand how the person one loved most could be someone other than the person by one's side. I only saw through it after years of longing for what I could not have. To an extremely self-centered artist, a wife was not the object of his overflowing love. She was merely a tool that helped him handle all the trivial details of life. Art is honest. I truly did not give him that kind of creative inspiration. I used the words Paul had once thrown at me to explain. I smiled and said as if it did not matter. As long as it sounds good. Isn't that enough? But Luis looked at me deeply and shook his head firmly. After a long silence, he suddenly turned around and played another new piece. The melody was graceful and lingering, like a crescent moon, lonely and bright. Its style was completely different from Lily. It's a piece I wrote, madam. Do you think it sounds good? This was not any of the pieces he had submitted for his composition assignments, but it carried intense emotion and even had some of his own style. I praised him with surprise. It sounds wonderful, Luis. You really are amazing. He smiled a little shyly, like a child who had been fully satisfied. He did not explain much, only saying, "Then that's good." Many years later, it was only on his 5th album that I heard this song named after me again, so it turned out he had told me that early on. I could also be someone else's inspiration. Chapter 5. In truth, Paul was not suited to being a teacher. A teacher needed to have the awareness of giving, needed to help others achieve something, but he did not. Someone like Luis, whose talent even I could see, did not even receive a recommendation letter from Paul in the end. The last time I saw Luis, his shoulders were slumped, like a dejected puppy. I returned to him the composition assignments he had handed in before, trying to smooth things over for Paul and comfort Luis at the same time. Actually, the teacher really does appreciate you. It's just that the number of recommendation letters he can write is limited. Look, he even wrote here that your work has special spirituality. Luis took the assignments and stared at Paul's handwriting on them, still so sad that he could not lift his head. I don't blame the teacher. I'm the one who isn't good enough. Outside, it began pouring rain. He was about to walk into the rain. I grabbed him and went inside to find an umbrella for him. There will be other opportunities. You have to keep going. Thank you, madam. That day, the rain was very heavy. So heavy that the road ahead could not be seen clearly. Amid the mist that filled the sky, he held the umbrella and walked forward step by step. Soon, The cuffs of his pants were soaked. I knew he would walk his own path, but I truly did not expect that he would reach such a high place. In the 3rd year after graduation, Luis debuted and became explosively popular, sweeping the Golden Melody Awards with his first album. When Paul received the invitation to the celebration banquet, he said to me with an extreme sense of entitlement, "That kid still knows how to be grateful." Chapter 6. At the celebration banquet, Paul put on the full airs of a great mentor. When he saw that he was not seated at the main table, he refused to take his seat. He deliberately pulled a familiar acquaintance from the main table into fake small talk, dragging things out and refusing to leave. I tugged at his sleeve several times, reminding him not to fuss over such a small thing. Behind Luis's award, there were so many producers and investors, whether in the present or the future. Which one of them was not more important than a teacher like him? But Paul remained unmoved, making the assistants spin around anxiously. My face also grew hotter and hotter, watching everyone gradually take their seats while only he and I stood there awkwardly. Drawing sideways glances made me feel even more uncomfortable, until Luis came out to smooth things over. "Teacher can sit here. He should have been here in the first place. It must have been a mistake in their arrangement." His manager struggled to adjust a seat and said in a low voice, "There really isn't any way to arrange another seat at this table. How about Teacher Paul takes a seat first?" Paul very naturally shook off my hand and went over to sit down, without a single word of explanation, as if I no longer existed. After all, so many people were watching. I felt rather embarrassed. I lowered my head, smiled awkwardly, and prepared to leave, but Luis gently held me back. "Madam, can you sit in my seat?" How could that be allowed? I was extremely shocked. Tonight, so many famous figures had gathered here. What right did I have to sit in Luis's most central seat? "It's all right. If you hadn't brought me that chair back then, I would not have the seat today." Sincere and complicated emotions rose in Luis's eyes. He bent slightly and personally pulled out the main seat for me. "Madam, in my heart, only you can sit in my place." When the banquet ended, it began to rain heavily. There was still some distance from the entrance to where the car was parked, so Paul and I walked over beneath the same umbrella. We happened to run into Luis there, seeing guests off. When he exchanged polite farewells with Paul, Luis's gaze seemed to fall, intentionally or unintentionally, on my left shoulder. It was already soaked through, showing a darker color than the rest of my clothes. Along the way, Paul's umbrella had tilted toward himself. Perhaps that was the years-long embarrassment beneath the marital relationship I had worked so hard to keep respectable. The rain grew denser and denser, striking the umbrella and splashing onto me. Yet Paul noticed nothing. He was still quite interested in chatting, pulling Luis along to reminisce about the past. The damp fabric clung to my skin, sticky and cold. I found it even harder to lift my head. Luis suddenly interrupted Paul stiffly. "Teacher, the rain is getting heavier. You should get in the car quickly." He personally held the umbrella and escorted us to the car. Only strangely, he walked on my side. His long, distinct fingers climbed around the umbrella handle, stretching across in front of me. The black umbrella canopy slanted in so forcefully, separating me from Paul's half-hearted cover and completely shielding me. Chapter 7. Luis invited Paul to collaborate on the production of his next album. Paul agreed on the surface, but privately, he did not think much of it. "That kid's music lacks refinement. I need to help elevate it." That arrogant expression was exactly the same as when he privately evaluated his students. For those with mediocre talent, he would despise and insult them, saying that teaching such fools was purely a waste of time. For those with outstanding talent, he would grow jealous, nitpicking and saying they were only lucky. Paul had always been like this. On one hand, he could not bear to give up the school's prestigious reputation. On the other, he was tired of teaching work that consumed his artistic spirit. Just like this time, although he clearly looked down on the popular music Luis made, he could not bear to let go of the glory of being the mentor of a top star. As expected, later on, the two of them had a huge argument during work. Paul slammed the door and left. After returning home, he cursed for several days. The next time I saw Luis was at the dinner he arranged to apologize to Paul. Luis's current commercial value was calculated in 6 figures per minute. Coming to apologize during a gap in his schedule already showed great sincerity, and his words were extremely earnest. I have always admired teachers' talent. Back then, when you reviewed my assignments, you gave me many excellent suggestions. Now, I'm sure you can also help me make better work. It's just that we've only just started working together, so there must be areas where we need to adjust to each other. I hope teacher can give me another chance. Paul's expression softened slightly, but then he found fault with the cup of water Luis offered in respect. This isn't alcohol? Luis's manager quickly explained. Teacher, replacing wine with tea is indeed impolite. But Luis has a concert this week, and his throat truly cannot handle alcohol right now. How about I drink this cup on his behalf? The wine glass was offered very low, but Paul lightly turned his gaze away and did not raise his glass in response. The atmosphere froze for a moment. I hurriedly stood up, picked up a cup of tea, replaced Paul's wine glass with it, and persuaded him. Paul, you shouldn't drink either. It's bad for your health. Paul glanced at me, slowly took it, but poured out the tea, filled the entire cup with alcohol instead, and handed it back to me. If no one's drinking, then you drink. I was allergic to alcohol. He knew that. He was blaming me for meddling and deliberately putting me on the spot. I could refuse, but at that moment, I only wanted to resolve this farce as quickly as possible, so I took a deep breath and was just about to take that glass of alcohol. Just then, a hand moved faster than mine and swiftly took the glass. Teacher, I'll drink. Watching Luis's Adam's apple move as he swallowed that glass of alcohol with difficulty but decisively, my fingers instinctively clenched the tablecloth. His manager's face beside him had already turned deathly pale. Only Paul curled his lips with satisfaction, enjoying that moment when he stood above everyone. Chapter 8. When I went out to look for Luis, his manager was arguing with him. You wouldn't drink wine from sponsors worth hundreds of millions, so why did you have to drink your teacher's cup? If you didn't drink it, what could anyone do to you? There are only a few days left before the concert. What if something happens to your voice? Luis's face was pale, and he waved tiredly, clearly unwilling to say more. Only when he saw me come over did he greet me. Madam. When his manager saw me, his expression turned displeased. After giving an instruction, he left. I'll go make an appointment with the doctor and wait for you at home. Looking at Luis, I did not know what to say. You really shouldn't have drunk that glass. He had already softened. It would have been fine for me to drink it. You drink it? Luis's question was not very polite. Do you want to go to the hospital that badly? I tried to make the matter lighter, so I smiled and explained. That kind of allergy isn't fatal. It just makes my whole body red and itchy for a few days. As long as I control myself and don't scratch, it's fine. Luis quietly looked at me, his gaze focused and silent. Suddenly, he spoke. Madam, you don't have to smile. What? Just now at the table, teacher was angry the entire time, and the manager was angry too. But you kept smiling. Why are they all allowed to have tempers, but you have to smile? I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. In the wall mirror opposite us, I saw that all the decoration on my body seemed to have been stripped away, leaving me naked. I felt so embarrassed that I grew somewhat angry. What's wrong with smiling? Luis looked at me, some emotion restrained in his eyes. I only hope that you smile when you're happy. My body instantly stiffened. There had been too many moments when I should clearly have been angry or sad, yet I had used a smile to ease the situation. I clearly felt pain, yet I tried my hardest to disguise it as happiness. This marriage felt as if I had entered a lie, yet I did not have the courage to jump out of it immediately. Instead, I tried to turn the false into the real over the long years. It was wretched, but it was also the way I managed to breathe. Luis's eyes were complicated, but they were always filled with kindness, as if he were holding something up. Perhaps it was my shaky self-esteem. I did not know what else I could say. Somewhat stiffly, I looked away and turned to leave. After I had only taken 2 steps, Luis suddenly called me from behind. Madam. I turned to look at him. His expression was somewhat stubborn. You came out now because you care about me, or because you're helping teacher smooth over his relationships? In my long silence, Luis smiled self-mockingly. If it's the latter, you can rest assured. Teacher has shown me kindness. I won't hold a grudge against him. I'm going back inside. As he spoke, he lowered his head, tucked his hands into his trouser pockets, and walked sideways past me. In the instant we brushed past each other, I grabbed his sleeve. Luis's body stiffened. He stared fixedly at my hand, then raised his head to look at me, as if asking, "What does this mean?" I did not know what I was doing either, so I let go of him again, but Luis did not move. He stared at me tightly, waiting until I spoke. "It's like this. I used to make a kind of medicinal tea for your teacher. It's a folk remedy from my hometown. It's good for the throat. If you don't mind, I can make it for you." Chapter 9. I had not brewed this medicinal tea in many years. Paul had once remembered it and asked me about it. I said one ingredient was missing, so I could not make it. In truth, all the ingredients in that recipe were easy to find. What was missing was only my willingness to insist on making tea for him. I did not know from which year onward I no longer had either sincerity or expectation toward Paul. All that remained was habitual endurance. Paul did not care either. This had always been something dispensable in his life. If he was thirsty, what could he not drink? But Luis acted as if I were about to give him some miraculous elixir. Surprised and cautious, he confirmed it again and again. "Really, is that okay?" "It is, as long as it can help you." I kept making medicinal tea for Luis all the way until his concert, and his voice recovered very well. I had originally thought that on the day of the concert, I would personally bring that portion to him, but that day, Paul was going to another concert. He had never intended to lower himself and attend his own student's show. On the phone, Luis sounded very disappointed, but thoughtfully explained on our behalf. "The farewell concert of a world-class music master really is rare. If I didn't have my own concert, I'd want to go too." After a pause, he spoke from the other end. "Madam, if teacher weren't there, would you come?" His sentence stopped abruptly, as if he himself had realized the impropriety and offense in his words. I actually wanted to hear the rest, but I knew even more clearly that I could not ask. Chapter 10. At the concert, we ran into Lily. She happened to have returned to the country for vacation recently. Perhaps Paul knew, perhaps he did not. In any case, he had no intention of explaining anything to me. He simply greeted her naturally and chatted with her about the concert that had just ended. The more they talked, the more engaged they became, mixing French and English in between. I could understand some of it, but I had no interest in joining the conversation. Bored, I stayed beside them and kept them company, seeing that they seemed ready to move on to the next place. I interrupted at the right time. "Then you two can go? I'll head back first." Paul finally spared a little attention for me. His eyes looked somewhat confused, as if he were trying to figure out whether my tone was normal or whether I was saying the opposite of what I meant. Lily was even more shocked, her eyes widening as she hesitantly looked toward Paul. I had no desire to deal with it anymore, so I said goodbye and left. Originally, I had indeed planned to go home, but when the taxi driver asked where I was going, as if possessed, I said, "To the stadium." The top-tier sound system clearly carried the singing from inside the venue. Luis's voice, full of stories, drifted above the stadium. It was especially beautiful. Only the concert was close to ending. I regretted it a little. The moonlight was so lovely tonight. Why had I gone to someone else's world to play a supporting role instead of coming here to listen to the songs I liked? Outside the venue, many fans who had not managed to buy tickets had gathered together, singing along while watching the live stream on their phones. I also found a place in the crowd and sat down. A fan beside me scrolled through Weibo while counting how many trending topics tonight's concert had made. Luis concert. Luis 100 million level sound equipment. Even drinking water tastes like first love. The fan tapped into the topic and soon screamed, "Holy crap, he really is so handsome. Who came up with this topic? It fits too perfectly." Under the topic was actually just an animated image of Luis getting thirsty between songs and taking a sip from his cup. At that moment, his eyes were slightly closed, the corners of his lips curving into an intoxicated arc. When he tilted his head back to swallow, his Adam's apple rolled, and when he looked back at the camera, even his smile seemed a little more entranced. It truly did have the atmosphere of first love. I was extremely familiar with that cup. Inside was the medicinal tea I had woken up early to brew for 2 hours, then filtered twice before pouring it in. On his stage, it was ordinary and unremarkable, yet it had always been there. I watched that animated image over and over again, only feeling that the curve of his lips was like the crescent moon tonight. The noisy screams around me drifted farther and farther away. At that moment, it was as if the entire world had vanished, leaving only that crescent moon clear and bright. Chapter 11. That night, I was shaken awake by Paul in the middle of the night. Still drowsy, I saw him sitting by my bed, still wearing the suit from the concert, carrying the chill of his late return. His gloomy gaze shrouded me. "What were you dreaming about?" "You were smiling." I had long since grown used to this kind of inexplicable provocation. In outsiders' eyes, Paul was the youngest professor at the conservatory, more than good enough for me in every aspect. But they did not know that artists made the worst life partners. When he was immersed in work, he could go an entire day without saying a single word. Whether I asked him what he wanted for dinner or whether his students were allowed to visit, he would not answer, as if I did not exist in his life. Sometimes I even felt that if I suddenly fell ill and died at home, he would step over my corpse without noticing and walk into his studio. When his creative work did not go smoothly, he would lose his temper at random, and because he himself had insomnia, he would not allow me to sleep either. Sometimes, I even felt as if I had married a mentally ill person. Today, he woke me up again for an absurd reason. "What were you dreaming about?" In the past, I might have argued with him, but at this moment, I was not angry at all, nor was I afraid. I smiled provocatively. "In any case, not you." Paul looked at me coldly. After a moment of silence, he rose indifferently. "There's a work meeting on Luis's side the day after tomorrow. I have something to do. You go." I did not have Paul's airs, and communication with anyone went smoothly for me, let alone with Luis. But that day, Luis was in a bad mood. During the meeting, he kept his head lowered without saying a word, his fingers irritably spinning a pen. Finally, when his manager took a call and left, he threw out Paul's social media post from a few days ago. It was a group photo that had circulated in the circle after the concert that day. Everyone in the photo was a first-rate musician. Lily stood beside Paul, lightly holding his arm, smiling gracefully, just as they had back at school. "And you? Why weren't you there?" Luis was even angrier than I was. "Didn't you go to the concert with teacher?" I explained. "I left early that day, so I didn't make it in time for the photo." "So? And you still have the mood to come here and attend the meeting on his behalf?" Luis pulled up Paul's latest social media post. "Do you know what teacher is doing right now? He's at the airport. Lily is leaving the country today." I knew Paul had something to do, but I truly had not expected that he had gone to see Lily off. I was a little surprised, but there was no ripple in my heart. I also did not know what to say. Instead, from Luis's awkward anger, I actually saw a kind of pained disappointment, as if he hated that I was not living up to expectations. I tried to express that I did not care and returned the phone to him. "Let's ignore him. Shall we continue?" But Luis's face completely darkened, while the atmosphere was stiff. The manager came in to smooth things over. "Ms. Diana, after chatting just now, I feel you're very professional. It must be because you've been with teacher Paul for so many years and have been influenced by him." "Oh, I just realized your handwriting is exactly the same as teacher Paul's too." Once, in order to understand what Paul said, I had read the books he read, learned the pieces he liked, and even imitated his handwriting. Those were all my ways of loving him. But in the end, they only made me a little more useful. I smiled awkwardly and explained, "I'm using his handwriting only because I'm currently working under his name." But the manager did not listen. He only picked up the 2 pages and handed them to Luis. "Luis, look, how deeply in love must 2 people be for even their handwriting to match? Your madam and teacher Paul really are such a devoted couple." Luis's gaze swept over them. His lips tightened, and he said nothing. Chapter 12. The work meeting was not finished before Luis left, his back seeming to carry an incurable decisiveness. I returned home in a daze and saw Paul sitting in the living room as if nothing had happened. I could not help questioning him. "If you were seeing her off, then fine, but why did you have to post it on social media? You're unhappy?" Paul's lips curved slightly, and for some reason, he looked pleased. "Good that you're unhappy. It means you're still normal." "What? You clearly could have stayed there that day, talked with everyone a little, yet you insisted on leaving early. When I came back at night, You were already asleep. Paul frowned, his tone carrying a hint of warning. Diana, you don't have to be this sensible. It makes me think that you truly don't care. I quickly understood. So the group photo from the next day had been posted for me to see when I still did not react. Today's airport farewell happened. I felt a trace of absurdity. Are you sick? Paul smiled, as if I were praising him. Paul was like this. The one who was unhappy was clearly him. But he would not say it. He had to torment you until you were also uncomfortable and unable to bear it. Until you came to him first. In his world, it was always other people who had to beg him to stop. Seeing that my expression was truly ugly, Paul mercifully explained a few more words. Don't worry, there's no one in this world worth my constant longing. What is Lily? I merely chatted with her on a whim. You are the person who lives with me. That final sentence carried a somewhat obscure hint of confession. After Paul finished speaking, he even paused, as if waiting for me to be moved. But I only thought self-mockingly, Lily was not me. Her world was broad. How could she possibly cooperate with his self-centeredness? Are you still angry? I waved my hand tiredly and did not want to say another word. Chapter 13. When the news came that Luis's side had terminated the collaboration, Paul showed no surprise and no regret. Only full disdain. It's fine not to participate. I'd be embarrassed to put my name on that kind of pop music anyway. This was his album to begin with. Why should it satisfy your philosophy? Shouldn't you be the one cooperating with his style and inspiring his creation? Paul bristled. Have I gone mad? Why should I lower my standards to cater to him? I very much wanted to refute him, but I felt powerless. Musical philosophy was inherently subjective. If we kept arguing, Paul would only tell me to look at more world-class artworks and improve my musical foundation. I only could not help thinking that if Paul were not so difficult, perhaps Luis could have existed in my life a little longer. After Luis left, I felt restless all day long. Even the daily life that was no different from before became increasingly unbearable. I began to be unable to stand the color of the sofa at home, unable to stand the curtains that had to be tightly shut even during the day. I could not stand the trouble of Paul failing to appear at mealtimes, then later shouting that he was hungry. I could not stand the clothes he had placed on the table for me to iron for him to wear the next day, even when his school called to ask about his work arrangements. Several times the words that surged to my throat were, "What does that have to do with me?" Paul noticed my impatience and only thought I was still angry. When he returned from a business trip, he uncharacteristically brought me a gift. At the dinner table, he even proactively brought up my younger cousin, who was about to continue her studies, and said he would arrange a good advisor for her. So when he wanted to please someone, he could indeed be flawless. Unfortunately, I was in no mood to be touched. I began to uncontrollably search for news about Luis. Like a rejuvenated fangirl, I mixed into his fan groups and analyzed his mood that day with them, his outfit, and the deeper meaning of a certain lyric in his music. One day, a fansite photographer who had leaked unofficial photos said that Luis seemed to have caught a cold, and his voice was hoarse when he greeted them. The fan group was filled with concern. The fans who cared about his health worried about his body, while the career-focused fans worried about an upcoming music variety show he would soon record. Although he was a mentor, he also had a performance segment. After thinking for a long time, I still decided to write down the recipe for that medicinal tea and send it to his manager. The package was signed for, but there was no reply. It was not until unofficial footage from the recording day came out that fans said his voice had not fully recovered, but he had chosen a song suited to his voice at the time, and the result was unexpectedly stunning. Everyone was happy, but I felt very disappointed. He had not drunk the medicinal tea. That recipe was probably already thrown into some corner, unnoticed by anyone. To enter the fan group, there was a verification question: "Why do you like Luis?" They all answered, "He is handsome, talented, creative, emotionally intelligent." The answers varied. At the time, I thought for a long time, yet it was difficult to summarize this feeling with one or two words. Why did I like him? Perhaps because he had seen my wounds and my embarrassment, the version of myself that even I felt ashamed of and tried so hard to cover up. He felt sorry for, grieved for. He saw me. Perhaps I should use another phrase. He had once seen me. Suddenly, I felt unbearably sad. That startling glimpse, in the end, had still been withdrawn. I left all the fan groups and returned, as if giving up on myself, to my ordinary life. Among the trivial tasks Paul disliked getting involved in, my favorite was grading his students' assignments. After all, that required a little creativity, a little aesthetic judgment. Before Paul returned from his business trip, I finished grading all the assignments he had delayed. After handing them out, there was still one left unclaimed, with no name written on it. I repeatedly confirmed that every student in the class had received their assignment. Until the next day, I received a call from a number that had not rung in a long time. Luis's voice was low and trembling. "Teacher, I'm here to pick up my assignment." Chapter 14. Luis sat in front of me once again, gazing for a long time at the annotations on the assignment. I never understood before the teacher who could revise those passages for me back then, who gave me so much encouragement and appreciation. Why does he feel almost like a completely different person now? Until I discovered that you can write exactly like Teacher Paul. Luis's voice trembled slightly, surging with emotions that were almost impossible to restrain anymore. "So, those assignments of mine before, you were the one who graded them, right? That isn't important. In terms of probability, I probably was the one who graded them, but some words only carried weight when they were under Paul's name. After all, who would care about the praise and opinions of an ordinary person with an unimpressive resume? How is that not important? The person I'm looking for is you." Luis's tone sank. "Or is it that you love Teacher so much that everything you do, you're willing to put under his name? How could that be? With Paul's artistic fastidiousness, how could he tolerate me putting things under his name? He only threw the students' assignments to me because they were unimportant." Seeing that Luis was about to interpret this matter again as my selfless love, I said even more firmly, "No, it isn't like that. I no longer have much feeling for Paul. I did those things only because I liked doing them." Liked. Luis savored those two words, then suddenly stood and walked in front of me. "What about me?" He crouched down and slowly took my hand, leaving me time to refuse. "Does that include me too?" The circle of skin around my wrist that he held was burning hot. My heart grew even more nervous. But no matter what, I could not give either an affirmative or negative answer. After the silence, I brought up something else. "The prescription I sent you. Why didn't you drink it? I thought that meant you were no longer going to care about me." Luis raised his face to look at me. "Besides, what use is there in having only the prescription? Without that one missing ingredient of sincerity, who else would spend 3 hours brewing a cup of tea for me?" I held his hand back. Some questions were not answered again, but it seemed there was no need to say anything more. Luis leaned before my knees, held my right hand with both hands, and solemnly pressed a kiss to it. Chapter 15. Before Paul returned from his business trip, our car headed north all the way to the seaside villa. Luis's house was the one closest to the sea, almost extending into it. The waves struck the rock walls all night. His breathing was heavy and helpless, until I took his hand and melted away his unfamiliarity inch by inch. Dissolving his fear, we rose and fell in the waves, making love all night until dawn finally broke. At daybreak, the shore seemed to float upon the sea, near and far at once. Luis wrapped me in his oversized shirt and held me as we sat before the huge floor-to-ceiling window. He spoke of those years, when he had also been a young man full of doubt about the future. In a music academy filled with talented people, every moment he doubted his own talent. On ordinary days, he never received much favor from the teacher. Instead, the assignments he handed in received a great deal of sincere appreciation. He thought that if something even the strictest professor approved of, then it must have value. Sometimes opportunity rewards that spirit in a person. Whoever believes in themselves more stubbornly wins. So it turns out you were the one who graded my work. Luis held me even tighter from behind. His lips brushed against my ear as he said hoarsely, "So, Diana, either I save you, or I sink with you." We spent 2 days by the sea. It was not until the message came that Paul had finished his business trip and boarded the plane that Luis drove me home. On the return journey, our car and Paul's plane rushed home at the same time, hurried like the return after a prison break. Luis asked me when we would meet again, but the car window was wide open, and the wind roared in, drowning out my voice, perhaps because I was in a good mood. When I returned home and looked at Paul again, for some reason, I found him much easier on the eyes. With great interest, I cooked a whole table of food. When I spoke to him, I could not stop the corners of my mouth from soaking in a smile, probably because of certain lingering aftertastes. Paul stared at me for a while, somewhat satisfied. Finally done making trouble? People say absence makes the heart grow fonder. Seems there is some truth to that. I smiled strangely and could not help changing one word in my heart. Absence leads to a new marriage. It was very strange. The more often I met Luis, the more patient I became with Paul. His odd harshness, his coldness and selfishness, I could dismiss all of it with a smile, perhaps because I was too easy to deal with. The little attention Paul had previously paid to me was safely withdrawn. After all, he had only been afraid that my emotions would disrupt his comfortable life. So once everything became stable and normal again, he finally returned to his own artistic world, and I finally stopped being angry, shouting, and accusing. I finally stopped withering in this indifference, because I had found new nourishment. Although I had a husband who did not care much about me, Luis's reckless behavior had reached a frightening degree. On my birthday, he actually sent flowers directly to my home early in the morning. Even more absurdly, Paul thought I had sent them to myself, only to remind him indirectly that it was my birthday. At that moment, I did not even know what expression to make. His measure of me seemed forever frozen at the time when I loved him most. His soul was immersed in the strongest fragrance of that love, yet he took it for granted that these flowers did not need to be watered and would bloom forever without withering. He seemed truly unaware that only fake flowers were like that. Looking at Paul's eternally arrogant face, I could not help imagining what expression he would have if he learned of my betrayal. Would cracks split open across that face? Would it shatter into pieces and fall down one by one? Honestly, I was rather looking forward to it. Chapter 16. That bouquet of flowers eventually still caused some trouble, because Paul accepted the reminder, canceled his dinner engagement that night, and mercifully said he would spend my birthday with me. And on that day, Luis and I had originally agreed to meet at the villa. I had no choice but to break the appointment. Afterward, Luis's schedule became increasingly packed, so it was almost a week later that I finally saw everything he had prepared so carefully for me at the villa. On the wall, one letter in the English words "Happy Birthday" had fallen down. The cake had passed its best before period and collapsed. The huge bouquet on the table had wilted, as if even dust had settled on it. I could not help imagining what Luis had thought that night, sitting alone in this prepared ceremony, so I simply cleaned up the remains little by little, lest he see it later and have his mood ruined. Luis did not arrive until evening. As soon as he came in, he hugged me and buried his head in the hollow of my neck. Inhaling deeply, he said in a muffled voice, "Divorce him, okay?" In the moment of my silence, he had already tightened his arms, reluctant to let go. No, I denied it. It was just that the longer a marriage lasted, the more painful and damaging divorce became. Subconsciously, I still wanted to follow inertia and live in temporary peace. Luis was somewhat angry. Then in the future, every holiday I want to celebrate with you has to be decided by him? He decides whether I can spend it with you or not. Why? My hesitation probably disappointed him. Luis slammed the door and left. I chased him to the doorway, but I had not thought of how to keep him. I stood there awkwardly and hesitantly. After who knew how long, the door suddenly opened from the outside. Luis came in and saw me. His steps paused. Then he smiled helplessly, took my hand, and pulled me with him as we fell tiredly sideways onto the bed. Forget it. We already have so little time together. I don't want to use it to argue with you. Luis lay beside me, propping his head up. The exhaustion under his eyes was heavy. Wasting these 2 days means I have to make up for so many announcements. I'm sorry. No, you haven't wronged me. I don't want to force you. If you're happy, then let it be this way. Luis took out his phone and played a demo for me. Music flowed out, and neither of us spoke again. I listened seriously. If I was not mistaken, this should be a song from his new album, and he had obviously already listened to it many times. Absent-mindedly, he played with my hair, winding it around his fingers in circles. It sounds good, I said in delight, especially the interlude in the middle. The piano sound is heavy, wrapping around the agility of the violin, mixed with the background sound of the waves. It makes me think of a line of poetry. Drunk, I do not know the sky lies in the water. A boat full of clear dreams presses down the galaxy. I rambled on about scattered feelings. Luis smiled and asked, "Doesn't it sound familiar?" "Listen again." I listened to it twice more, and suddenly remembered the day we first came here. Afterward, in the early morning, when dawn was about to fade into day, Luis still had an announcement in the afternoon. I helped him iron the clothes we had wrinkled, humming a tune I myself did not recognize. Luis had embraced me from behind, pressed close to my ear, and said it sounded good, asking me to hum it again. "Yes, it was that part you hummed that day." My face instantly grew hot. "How did you even remember that?" Luis smiled and said, "This is our work." I shook my head awkwardly. How could I have that kind of talent? "No, you do. Of course you do." Luis kissed me deeply. "You are my enlightenment." Luis's eyelashes trembled slightly. I looked at the ceiling and responded to him with some dull slowness. His music flowed through the entire room. Every note struck heavily against the bottom of my heart, where it trembled like a tsunami sweeping through. I thought, I should get divorced. Chapter 17. I had imagined countless times the scene of divorcing Paul. How I would tell him, with a taste of revenge, that all my radiance during this period had been because of another man, that all the gentleness and consideration I showed him were merely the overflow of sweetness I had received from someone else. And that person was even his student. I could not help imagining how devastated and ridiculous his expression would be. I never expected that when I truly brought up divorce, I would be so restrained, calm, and silent, leaving no extra information for him to interpret. Paul even thought this was another trick of mine to seek attention. That familiar disdain appeared in his eyes. "What are you trying to do now?" I took out the agreement I had prepared and placed it in front of him. "I can't bear one more day with you." Paul froze slightly, as if he also understood how difficult he was to live with. He did not refute me, only said as if advising me, "You've endured it for so many years. Why can't you keep enduring it? A person only lives for a few decades. I don't want to waste any more time." "Is that not allowed?" "How childish, Diana. Do you really think you can accept leaving me?" Paul casually mentioned a trivial matter. "Recently, the school is recruiting an assistant for me. Hundreds of resumes have come in, and even the worst first degree among them is from a top foreign academy. They'll still have to spend 4 or 5 years as assistants before they might have a chance to move up one step. And even if they work diligently their whole lives, they might not be able to obtain a ticket to any single conference of mine, any single exchange event in the circle. But you, as long as you stand beside me, from the Prime Minister to top celebrities, all of them treat you as an honored guest. You like all of this, don't you? Leaving me, you won't even compare to them." I had to admit that when I stood beside Paul, I was indeed standing in his halo. Perhaps every gift heaven gives you has already been marked with a price. The long, unbearable years in this marriage were perhaps the price of vanity under the identity of Mrs. Paul. Paul spoke as if it were for my own good. "Anyway, you're becoming more and more skillful at it now, and I can't be bothered to start over with someone else. Why don't we both endure a little? Don't make trouble, all right? Next month, your father is celebrating his birthday. I'll go back with you. Be good." He intimately pinched my cheek, stood up, and walked back to his studio as usual. Chapter 18. But I stopped him. If I hadn't already thought these things through, I wouldn't have brought up divorce. Indeed, my hesitation all this time had contained a trace of fear and confusion. After stripping away the identity of Mrs. Paul, what would I have left? What would I even be? Many years ago, I wrote an application letter and sent it to my dream school. I did not receive a reply, but I received Paul's proposal. The joy of love diluted the disappointment of my dream. I began managing a marriage, and I also entered top-level places with strict entry qualifications, only under the identity of Mrs. Paul. After all these years, did I still have the courage to face that resume that never received a reply? To face my life that had been interrupted for many years and had gained nothing more? I could not give a definite answer, but at least I could not bury myself inside a gorgeous living tomb, one where even the headstone did not bear my name. I lowered my head and quickly signed my name on the agreement, then handed it back to Paul. "Starting today, I'll move out first. Let me know once you've signed it." Looking at Paul's incredulous face, I actually felt somewhat sad. After 10 years of marriage, at the final moment, what he emphasized was not emotion, but his value to me. It showed how ridiculous it had been for me to once hold fantasies towards someone like him and wait for a response. After packing my things and heading out, Paul was still sitting stiffly in the living room, staring at the divorce agreement. No one knew what he was thinking. I could not help saying one more sentence. My father is old. Every birthday may possibly be his last. So every year, I travel thousands of miles back to see him. Ordinary people generally have feelings like this. But you don't. All these years, you have always been like this. As long as the flood of life hasn't reached your own nose, you can ignore it, even if the person beside you has already gone under. No matter how they cry for help, they can't make you look at them one more time. So Paul, if you had any conscience, you shouldn't have a family. You should grow old alone in your palace of art. Chapter 19. When he heard that I was filing for divorce, Luis's voice trembled over the phone. This is the best news I've ever heard. Actually, I also have a surprise for you. What? Every word from Luis surged with a drunken joy. You'll know very soon. However, in the end, I learned what that surprise was from his manager's furious phone call. He said Luis insisted on adding my name to the composition credits of that title track. What difference is there between this and announcing it to the whole world? As long as someone digs a little, they'll find out this person is his teacher's wife, and that she just happens to be divorcing his teacher recently. Then his public image will be finished. I would rather not release this album for him at all than let him mess around like this. The manager, who had always been smooth and tactful, could not calm down at all this time. He hesitated, afraid that if he did not explain clearly, I would indulge Luis without knowing the severity of the matter, yet also afraid that if he spoke too harshly, it would affect his relationship with Luis. In short, you're older than him. There are many things you must see more clearly than he does. He tried hard to organize his words, hoping to remind me without angering me just how big a landmine I was for Luis. Just the identity of being his former teacher's wife was enough to destroy him. Perhaps even he thought that my divorce was for the sake of being with Luis. How could that be? I had always envied Luis's talent, so abundant and overflowing that it carried him into the ranks of top stars all at once. If I had had a little more talent back then, perhaps I would not have been so cowardly. Perhaps I would not have retreated from my own life after encountering just a little setback. Becoming Paul's virtuous helper, becoming a byproduct of a man. Luis's future was too brilliant. No one wanted to become a shadow over his future, least of all me. If previously Luis had still been restrained by respect for his teacher, then now, the only one who could restrain him was me. I did not mention the threat that adding my name would pose to him, because when those possibilities of being exposed were brought up, there was even a faint expectation in his tone. I only spoke of my own concerns and worries. After all, Paul and I had not yet completed the procedures. Rather than leaving behind evidence of an overly overlapping timeline, it would be better to wait a little. In any case, in the future, we would still have many new works and many possibilities. Luis believed in my promise of a long future ahead, and in order to protect me, obediently removed my name. Then he said, rather unwillingly, on the next album, I must write your name. My heart ached. Again and again. My nose was clearly so sour that I was nearly choking, but I still smiled and coaxed him. All right, next time for sure. Chapter 20. There was no trace of me on Luis's album, but Paul's sense of music was top level after all. Perhaps the tunes I had unconsciously hummed at home before were precisely matched by him to this new hit song of Luis's. When Paul came to find me, his expression held more confusion than humiliation, as if he could not understand how he could possibly lose to a young brat. Are you insane? What can he give you? You can't use any of his fame, resources, or connections. You can't even be exposed. You can't even exist. What are you after? Without thinking, I answered, love. Something that doesn't exist with you. Take the recent matter of the album credits. For example, my fear of names, my confusion over identity. These were realizations I had only gained after living half a lifetime. Luis was still so young, and his career had gone so smoothly. He should not have been able to understand such faint, hidden emotions in my heart. Yet he vaguely sensed something, and that was why he insisted on adding my name. A person who knows how to love is like that. Even if he does not quite understand, and even if you cannot quite explain it clearly, he will still think of every possible way and do everything he can to ease your worries. even if the price is high. And someone who does not know how to love, like Paul, even if he understands everything perfectly, he will do nothing. He simply watches me like it is a game, watching the expectations I throw out receive no answer, fall to the ground, and then watching me pick them up again myself. And now, he only wanted to drag us into hell. I will ruin both of you completely. No, you won't. I looked into his eyes and said with certainty, unless you want to be ruined first. All these years, Paul's narrowness, selfishness, harshness, and profit-seeking nature had been exposed before me without restraint. I was the container for the darkest parts of his humanity. If we truly had to meet with blades drawn, I held far more leverage over him than he held over me. Perhaps my determination to protect Luis at all costs hurt him. A defeated expression appeared on Paul's face. He said angrily, "You think you and him will have a good ending? Even if I don't expose it now. What about later? What about other people? No one should expect to find any evidence in the future." Because I took a deep breath. I won't be with him. Paul laughed in anger. Then why the hell are you getting divorced? That day, Luis's manager had asked me the same question. Since I did not plan to be with Luis, why get divorced? I thought about it for a very long time. At the beginning, perhaps Luis and I had been trying to prove something. To prove that the lips my husband disdained to kiss had someone lingering over them, that the soul he dismissed had someone admiring it. I wanted to save my endangered self, so I would not sink into self-destruction under naked neglect and coldness. But Luis made me feel my own existence. He forcibly pulled me out from behind that sacred statue. He made me lower my head and see that, over all these years, I had also grown flesh and blood, that I also had a little talent belonging to myself. In those young, passionate pupils, I saw my complete self. It was precisely this sense of existence that gave me the courage to face my life, interrupted for so many years. Once more, I quietly looked at Paul, but at this moment, the cherishing and helpless renunciation that slid through my eyes were only for another person, because leaving you is something I should have done long ago. Chapter 21. The new place I found after the divorce was only an ordinary apartment unit. In terms of both security and privacy, it was far too poor for a public figure. But Luis insisted on coming. During the densely packed promotional period, he landed in the early hours of the morning, circled around the city several times, changed cars, and only arrived in the latter half of the night. Beneath his thin eyelids, even each blink overflowed with exhaustion. It was as if he no longer trusted his sight, so he simply buried his face into my neck and greedily inhaled. He held me tightly, as if he wanted to knead me into his own body. If I didn't come back and confirm it myself, I wouldn't dare believe that the moon had truly fallen into my arms. My heart began to ache little by little again. I gently patted his slightly cold back. "I'm right here. Sleep properly." He obediently fell asleep. Thanks to the bright moonlight that night, I did not need to turn on a lamp and disturb him, yet I could still clearly see the trembling lashes beneath his unguarded brows, and the Adam's apple he had bitten down on beneath the rugged outline of light and shadow. My gaze was greedy. After all, it was the last time. This was probably also the slowest meal I had ever made. He hugged me from behind, his head resting in the hollow of my shoulder. Like a sloth, wherever I went, he had to follow. His hands, made for playing the piano, did not know how to cut vegetables, yet he still insisted on helping me firmly hold down the ingredients on the chopping board. Then he reached into the sink with me, chasing and touching my hands amid the fine white foam. It turned out that the ordinary washing and cutting of a kitchen could also be like a four-hand piano duet. Afterward, he helped me apply hand cream, and when his fingers brushed over the ring mark on my ring finger, he paused slightly. I said it would fade. He smiled and shook his head, then lowered his head and kissed that faint mark. The time left was not enough for us to watch a movie, not enough for him to confess, and not enough for me to say goodbye. So we said nothing, only leaned against each other. He said a day like this was so short, and it made him look forward to the future so much. I said, "Me too." When we parted, I helped him put on his mask and sunglasses, wrapping him up tightly, yet he still refused to let go of my hand playfully, insisting that I walk him to the elevator. In the few seconds before the elevator arrived, he held my hand and swung it back and forth. "When this concert is over and I'm done being busy, Let's go out on a date. Let's go somewhere without a ceiling, okay? My tone was so sincere that even I felt cruel. Okay, definitely. Chapter 22. On the stage of the new song concert, Luis glanced countless times at the VVIP seat he had specially left empty. It stayed empty all night. His entire heart kept sinking. After finishing the last song, he received her flowers backstage, but he could not get through to her phone. He turned to question his manager. Where is she? Where is she? Didn't you say she entered the venue? She did enter the venue. She just wasn't in the seat you gave her. The manager handed him a letter. The handwriting on it belonged to her own. Luis realized what it was. Like a madman, he drove back to the venue, but he was blocked 3 kilometers away and could not go any farther. In the dark mass of people pouring out, he could no longer find her. Liar. In the dark car, only an aggrieved sob remained. That's too much. Chapter 23. Luis. You have seen me weak many times, so you should be able to forgive me for not having the courage to say goodbye to you face to face. I have never properly said thank you to you. I entered marriage before I had grown a fully formed self, and in that hollow marriage, I completely lost the coordinates of my own worth. It was you who allowed me to rediscover the feeling of truly crying and smiling, and you who gave me the courage to correct the mistakes in my life. I have failed myself too many times in the past, so in the future, I still need a great deal of time and effort to find myself again. I cannot simply let myself jump from behind one man to behind another, no matter how reluctant I am to part. There are always some roads that must be walked alone. Luis, you are truly chosen by fate. Back then, in the assignments I graded, that talent of yours once amazed me, so I could not help saying many things. I was fortunate enough to have watered it while it was still young. Now it is blooming, allowing everyone to see it. That is why I fear more than anyone else that you might fail this talent. You are still young. You still do not know the consequences of choosing wrong. You still cannot bear the long descent and endless decline after losing your glory. I do not want to become your mistake. I want to see you hanging high like the bright moon. This is my wish, and also my selfish desire, because the road ahead is long, and I want to be able to see you whenever I lift my head. Luis. Let us give ourselves a little more time. When you have lived your life to the fullest, and I also have an identity of my own, then we will meet again.